Hey everybody, and welcome back to History Student Reacts. Today we'll be watching Battle of Siffin 657, Rise of the Umayyad Caliphate by Kings and Generals. So last time in the early Muslim expansion series, we witnessed the first civil war. A lot of chaos within the Caliphate. I guess we'll see if that has been brought to an end, or if the chaos and political tensions will continue. If you guys end up enjoying this video, I'd appreciate it if you would check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. And without any further ado, let's jump into this reaction.
In our previous video, we covered the murder of Caliph Uthman and its dramatic political fallout, as the first challenge to the authority of his successor, Caliph Ali, took the form of a rebellion led by the Prophet's wife, Aisha, using the murder of his predecessor as its rallying cry.
Ali versus Aisha, two figures who had a lot of clout in the Muslim world, who both tried to wield their reputation. Ali ended up winning. He, I guess, technically preserved the status quo, although we saw a lot of chaos anyway. The status quo was sort of, under threat either way.
But as we move today to the Battle of Siffin and rebellion of Muawiyah, we must first dial back the clock to before Uthman's demise and examine his nepotistic role in lifting his clan, the Umayyads, from a wealthy Meccan family to the kingmakers of the Caliphate.
Okay, well that explains Umayyad Caliphate. I'm curious to see more of Uthman. We saw a bit of him, and it seems like he didn't do as good a job as Umar did. But we'll get to see more of his rule during this episode, and we also get to see the rise of the Umayyad Caliphate. It's interesting because, there are different names, like the Rashidun Caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate, etc., etc., and sometimes I wonder what separates them. Presumably, that sort of name change is to do with the ruling family of the era, and of course, we're going to see that during this video.
And how this contributed to the civil wars that followed Uthman's death. The 8th century was a turbulent time for the Muslim Empire, but it wasn't only...
Alright, so you guys know the deal. Shout out to Kings and Generals. Please go check out their video, which I'll have linked below in my description. Go and leave them a like, subscribe to their channel, and please go and check out their sponsor. Show them some support for making these fantastic videos that we enjoy.
At masterworks.io/cd. At its foundation, the Caliphate had been ruled and organized largely through the consensus of the companions in Medina. But for all Uthman's merits, his reign brought a definite shift away from the ideals of...
I'm also, this is a little off topic, but I'm sort of interested to see what happens when that generation really dies out. We're already sort of seeing it. Last time, we were talking about the children of some of the figures that we've been seeing throughout this series. Of course, sort of the ruling council, the companions, these are guys who were around alongside Muhammad. And so there's a lot of clout and authority that comes with that. But as time goes on, some of them are going to start to die off, either from battle or from old age. And we are slowly going to move into a time period when, our rulers, the rulers of the Caliphate, they weren't people who served and fought alongside Muhammad, but came after him. And we're sort of seem to be heading into that era, and it seems to be presenting a bit of a legitimacy challenge for some of these leaders.
Of justice and Islamic unity the early caliphate inherited from the Prophet. In pre-Islamic Arabia...
Okay, they kind of said what I was just saying. The unity inherited from Muhammad seems to be sort of slowly decaying over time.
Life had been divided sharply along clan lines, but under the caliphs Abu Bakr and Umar, brotherhood under Islam had superseded the tribal loyalties that existed before their faith.
Yeah, those two did a pretty impressive job of governing their expanding empire. I mean, we saw a lot of Umar in this series. He was a bit of a micromanager, but he was good at what he did. He governed effectively, and he kept the caliphate together.
In his speech upon becoming the first caliph, Abu Bakr had emphasized to the gathered Muslims of Medina that he was not the greatest among them, and that he would welcome the help and truthful advice of his subjects, even if it meant speaking against his own suggestions. And though Abu Bakr had adult sons, he passed the caliphate on to his advisor and fellow companion Umar, rather than attempt to create a ruling dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, that shows a level of humility, that isn't often seen from, say, rulers of empires. Passing the job down to the best man. It's an interesting way of doing it. There's a lot of different ways of doing succession. I've talked about this before. I mean, I think the best way is a democratic system where you elect the person, because that gives any president or prime minister a level of legitimacy. But in the ancient world, we see a lot of rulers who either descend from their parents or their parent, or, councils selecting the next ruler. Now, there's pros and cons each way. If you have a dynastic system where it's, say, passed down to the first son, you're probably going to get a lot of terrible leaders, but there is a level of stability that comes with that. A system like this, you may have a better chance of selecting a talented and skillful caliph, but there could be a lot of chaos and political infighting each time the caliph dies, and you have to select the new one. Of course, there's a lot of chaos and political infighting even with a dynastic system. So, it's sort of complicated. There's pros and cons for each, but this is why I say the best way to do it is with the modern democratic system, I think, because, it provides the most amount of legitimacy to your next leader.
Umar had famously lived the same humble lifestyle as caliph as he had before his coronation, sleeping on a bed of palm leaves.
Yeah, Umar seemed to have hated luxury. We saw that a few times in these videos. He also lived a very humble lifestyle.
And taking part in the same labors as his subjects in service of the needy. Under Uthman, however, the nepotistic clan politics of the pre-Islamic past began to return to the fore.
Uh-oh.
Relatives of Uthman were frequently granted positions of wealth and authority, with his first foster brother, Walid ibn Uqba, and later his uncle, Sayyid ibn As, being given governorship of Kufa. And while few could accuse Abdullah ibn Sa'ad of incompetence after his conquests in North Africa and victories at sea in the Mediterranean, the fact he had replaced Amr ibn Alas, Egypt's conqueror and previous governor, largely by virtue of being another of Uthman's foster brothers, did much to stir discontent among other companions of the Prophet.
Yeah, we saw some controversy with this in the other videos. Now, to be fair, Amr ibn Alas, he kind of had beef with Umar and Uthman. He was a loyal subject, but he wanted to do things his own way. So he would get himself into trouble with the caliph sometimes. But the decision to replace him with Abdullah, that does seem like a pretty blatantly nepotistic decision, even if Uthman had some issues with Amr. And this whole situation, it's also worth noting that, people are brought together by identities. That's sort of how communities are formed, by things that we have in common. Now, since Muhammad, sort of the main identity of this region has been religion, Islam. That's what's brought everybody together. And that's probably true for, say, the Byzantine Empire as well. Their most important identity is their Christian faith. But, people have more than one identity. And so this region before Islam was characterized by these different Arabic tribes, these clans. And while they were brought together by Islam, as time goes on, some of those old identities, those old clan alliances sort of start to re-emerge, and that's going to cause some division and some chaos.
And long-serving Muslims of Medina, who saw themselves being denied advancement in favor of Uthman's Umayyad clan. Thanks to these and several other Umayyads appointed to prominent positions, the clan swiftly grew to become one of the most powerful political entities within the caliphate, with governors of numerous far-flung provinces tied by family bonds and ready to resist any threat to the power they shared. The most prominent figure in this narrative, however, is Uthman's cousin, Muawiyah, a minor regional governor during Umar's reign, who Uthman granted lordship of all Syria. It had been on Muawiyah's suggestion that Uthman had ordered the caliphate's navy built, and its raids on Cyprus, Rhodes and Crete brought significant wealth pouring into Syria's coffers, making Muawiyah the most powerful out of a powerful family and the most likely rival to Ali in the wake of Uthman's killing.
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about earlier, the Caliphate was largely a land empire. The Byzantines, or the Eastern Roman Empire, was the predominant naval power of the region. But over time, the Muslims would start to build up their navy, and they would start, as many smaller naval powers start, with raids. And raids like that can bring a lot of cash. And over time, you can develop your navy and make it stronger, more efficient, larger, and perhaps compete with the Byzantines. That's sort of a long-term goal.
Conflict between Muawiyah and Ali has long been an inevitability, as one of the first actions Ali had taken after his election as caliph had been to order Muawiyah and many of Uthman's other appointed governors deposed.
Damn.
Muawiyah alone had been sufficiently powerful and secure in his position to refuse the order, and those governors that had been successfully deposed had flocked to back Muawiyah.
Interesting. So that's just a direct disobedience to Ali. I mean, there's not even a semblance of loyalty there. We're not hiding anything now. Ali sends an order, and Muawiyah just says, how about no? I don't have to do that. I'm not going to do it. Okay.
With whatever wealth or support they could offer. Confident in his power, Muawiyah had publicly rebuked Ali over Uthman's murder and tacitly claimed the caliphate as the murdered caliph's next of kin, effectively a declaration of war.
Wow.
Muawiyah's position was further strengthened by an unlikely ally, Amr ibn al-As, the conqueror and former governor of Egypt. Despite Amr's previous enmity towards Uthman,
Yeah, that is interesting. Amr, as I said, he had some issues with Uthman. So you would not expect Amr to sort of take on that legacy, take on the fight for a man that he had problems with, that he had beef with. But of course, this is more than just protecting Uthman's legacy. This is politics. So people have different motivations.
His popularity in Egypt made him a perfect candidate to tear the richest province in the caliphate out of Ali's hands. With Amr promised lifetime governorship of Egypt in exchange for his support, Muawiyah removed Egypt's current governor, Qais ibn Sa'd, through a masterful piece of deceit. He forged a letter from Qais to himself, agreeing to join his cause, and ensured Ali's spies learned of it. Deceived by this forgery, Ali deposed the competent and by most accounts loyal governor shortly after, with the inexperienced Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr taking his place, too late to muster significant Egyptian support for Ali in the battle to come.
That's tricky.
Amr also helped Muawiyah forge an important alliance with the most powerful tribe of Yemen, the Himyar.
Okay, Amr and Muawiyah, these guys have a lot of influence, clearly. I think this is showing us that the caliphate was not necessarily as centralized as the caliph might have wanted. Or perhaps it wasn't even as centralized as it was under Umar, who was, as I mentioned, a micromanager. He liked to control everything from the center. But if we look at it at this point, clearly there's a lot of different bases of power, and they are not necessarily all loyal to the caliph. Or if they are, it's a bit of a shaky loyalty.
Who had once ruled a powerful independent kingdom in pre-Islamic times. With Amr as his closest advisor, allies across the caliphate rallying to his banner, and Ali weakened by Aisha's recent rebellion, Muawiyah was in an incredibly secure position. Thus, when Caliph Ali departed Medina in late May 657 with his armies behind him to depose the recalcitrant governor, he would have a far tougher fight ahead of him than he perhaps expected. Before the two main armies met in battle, a series of cavalry pursuits and skirmishes took place at Harin and Raqqa, pitting Malik al-Ashtar against Abd al-Rahman ibn Khalid, son of the unrivaled Khalid ibn al-Walid, as Ali's army tested Muawiyah's strength and resolve and found both unbending. The first true struggle would take place at...
Muawiyah's in a strong position, but as we can see, Ali also has a lot of people who are still loyal to him. He still has a lot of power, so though the rebels have a strong position, so does Ali. This is definitely a competition.
At Siffin, on the banks of the Euphrates River. When Ali's army arrived on June 5th, they found Syrian cavalry blocking them from reaching the only accessible watering area for miles. This was against the advice of Amr, and proved to be a blunder on Muawiyah's part.
Ooh.
When rallying his armies for the campaign against Muawiyah, Ali had found it difficult to motivate his men. Many were reluctant to see so much more bloodshed between brothers in faith to bring a governor back into the fold. But Muawiyah's ill-advised attempt to deny his foes water in the desert heat lost him any sympathy he or his forces might have enjoyed in Ali's ranks, and set the stage for a vastly bloodier confrontation than had stained the sands at.
Very interesting. That is definitely something to consider in a civil war environment. Now, of course, you're fighting a war, right? So you want to do anything you can do to win. But since it's a civil war, there's other considerations based on your end goals. Presumably, Muawiyah wants to rule the caliphate. He wants to take over Ali's position. And so, you have to think, I'm going to rule these people after I win, because of course you're going to assume that you're going to win. I hope you have faith in yourself. I don't want to alienate them. You want to do the best you possibly can not to alienate the citizens of the caliphate. And so taking an action like that, cutting them off from water, that could contribute to your success. But, like Kings and Generals mentioned, that's going to lose you a lot of support or a lot of sympathy among the other side. It might make them fight harder against you. People who would otherwise desert and join your cause might not anymore. They might think, wow, he's merciless, he's brutal. I'm going to stick with Ali. And if you do win, after you win, you might have issues on your hands. People might remember, yeah, you dealt with your fellow Muslims brutally. That is, we don't like that. Recently we've been doing, we're always doing Historia Civilis, but recently we've been doing the Roman Civil War. And we can, I think Muawiyah could take a note out of the book of Julius Caesar, who during the Roman Civil War, though Caesar was a brutal commander, and he was not afraid to commit atrocities, we saw that during his conquest of Gaul, when he was fighting fellow Romans, Caesar always outstretched an olive branch. He always made clear, hey, if you guys want to join me, come and join. You're fellow Romans. I don't want to harm you. I want to rule over you peacefully. And so Caesar made sure to make that outreach, because he knew if he wins the civil war, he has to govern the empire. So he didn't want to be too brutal. And so perhaps Muawiyah could have kept that in mind.
Basra. The numbers involved are a matter of debate. Al-Tabari puts Ali's army at 70,000.
Whoa!
A likely inflated number.
Yeah, I was gonna say, holy shit, that is a massive army. That's a frankly massive army. We've seen numbers like that before throughout this series, but they've been massively inflated every time. So I'd be shocked if it was that many men.
Given that it counts more than 60,000 Kufans under his banner, while Al-Hassan had only been able to raise a tenth of that number for the Battle of the Camel.
Yeah.
But even taking a more conservative estimate of 20 to 30,000 for Ali...
That seems a lot more reasonable. 20 to 30,000, judging from the numbers we've seen throughout this series, that's still a very sizable fighting force. That's an impressive army for this time period.
With Muawiyah's army slightly larger, the Battle of Siffin was one of the largest and most impactful battles of Islamic history, and played out in a number of phases over the weeks to follow. Upon finding the accessible water blocked, Ali's advance guard, led by Al-Ash'ath ibn Qays, fell upon the Syrian force blocking their path with a vengeance, driving them back and securing the water for the thirsty army behind them.
Damn, and the plan of blocking the water source didn't even work. Okay, so you're losing sympathy from the other side for, in the end, basically no reason.
Following the Day of the Euphrates, as this small victory was known, the armies stood for 2 days of tense standoff and failed negotiation. followed by more than a week of daily raiding and personal duels between noble commanders, lasting until June 18th, each army testing the other's mettle, but reluctant to commit its full strength. June 19th saw a new ceasefire agreement forged, lasting more than a month, in a last attempt to reach a peaceful agreement, or at least convince opposing leaders to defect. But these overtures were no more successful than the previous ones. Envoys went back and forth for weeks between the two armies with messages and bribes, but the stalemate remained largely unchanged.
They were really trying to hash something out. You know, when you look at civil wars, there's kind of a spectrum between how willing the two sides are to fight each other. And, you know, with a civil war, there's always a bit of hesitancy. But sometimes, like, look at the American Civil War. That was Americans against Americans, but that was a brutal, massive war, you know? So there may have been some hesitancy in the beginning, but in the end, the two sides still fought this massive war against each other. And there was quite a lot of animosity, particularly by the end, between the two sides. You know, we can look at a lot of civil wars throughout history. Sometimes the two sides fight a civil war and become sort of permanently estranged from each other. I mean, there are many civil wars that have broken countries apart. Of course, the United States stayed together following their civil war. If we look at this one, I would say this is some of the most hesitant warriors I've seen. These two sides, they really don't want to fight each other. I think perhaps it's because they're bonded by their religion, Islam, and they strongly believe in their faith. And so they would really rather not fight other Muslims. And also, you know, this sort of internal conflict hasn't been a normal thing up until this point. You know, this is novel. The Caliphate has been pretty united up until now. And so everybody is still at this phase where they really don't want to fight each other. I suspect that might change over time. They'll become more willing to fight one another, fight their fellow Muslims, as it becomes more normalized. But at this point, they're still really reticent. They do not want to fight and kill their fellow Muslims, you know, fellow citizens of the Caliphate. They'd really rather not.
Finally, on July 26th, the two armies met in a battle that would last 3 days and 3 nights, nearly
Of course, as we're about to see, they really have no choice. They've tried weeks of negotiations, champion on champion battles, duels. None of it's working because while they don't want to fight each other, they are both sort of set in their ways. You know, they know what they want, and neither side apparently is willing to compromise. So if that's the case, they're going to have to battle.
Unbroken. The first day of the battle was inconclusive, mostly consisting of exchanges of arrows and cavalry raids, with casualties mounting, but neither side gaining an overwhelming advantage. The second day saw Muawiyah come very close to routing Ali, with Habib ibn Maslama leading a massive attack that drove Ali's right wing to flight and pushed hard against his center, driving his army into...
I mean, if you just showed me that screenshot, I would expect the battle to have ended right there. I mean, you know, Muawiyah's cavalry is flanking, they're pushing in. You could really imagine a situation where Ali's army completely collapses at this point.
Disarray before reinforcements, led by Malik al-Ashtar, could halt the Syrian advance. Abdullah ibn Budayl, who had been in command of Ali's right, attempted to press their momentary advantage by bringing his cavalry in a charge towards Muawiyah's tent, only to be surrounded and killed by Muawiyah's elite forces.
They were ready.
Also killed was Ammar ibn Yasir, whose presence had so frightened Zubair in the Battle of the Camel, fulfilling, according to pro-Ali accounts, the supposed claim of the Prophet that Ammar would die at the hands of a wicked band of men.
Wow.
The third day saw Muawiyah redouble his efforts to break Ali's right wing, sending his Himyarite allies against it under the leadership of Ubayd Allah ibn Umar, the disgraced son of Caliph Umar, whose name had been tarnished by an unlawful honor killing, but whose parentage nevertheless made him a useful political prop for the would-be Caliph Muawiyah.
Yeah.
This time, however, Ali's right held firm, killing both Ubayd Allah and Chief Dul Qalar of the Himyar.
Wow, we are seeing a lot of prominent figures being slaughtered, and we're only on day 3 of this battle. There have been a lot of prominent casualties already.
Inflicting terrible casualties. As the day drew on, the two armies were finally drawn into a general melee. The duels, maneuvers, and archery exchanges that had defined the previous days, giving way to a confused clash of swords and lances that continued through much of the night. As morning approached, after the bloodiest night of the civil war, Ali's army appears to have the upper hand, having driven Muawiyah's forces back and even forced him to relocate his tent to a safer location after another charge on his camp. But it would not, in the end, be strength of arms that decided the battle's outcome.
Really?
As morning arrived, a number of envoys from...
Because so far, I mean, we had some sort of light skirmishing. Then on day 3, particularly in the night of day 3, seems like the battle descended into an all-out slugfest, just going back and forth. Like they said, a confused melee. So I'm curious to see where it goes from here, because, I mean, we're definitely still sort of at a stalemate. But it doesn't take much to turn the tide of battle, particularly when both sides are getting tired, they're losing men, they're ready to end this.
From Muawiyah rode between the armies, Korans on their lances as a flag of truce, appealing to Ali to allow binding arbitration to settle his and Muawiyah's dispute. Though Ali held the advantage in battle, many of his soldiers, exhausted after the long battle and reluctant to continue fighting their brothers in faith, felt the offer provided an honorable alternative to further fighting, and ignored the encouragement of Malik al-Ashtar and others to continue fighting.
I mean, yeah, like we mentioned earlier, a lot of these soldiers don't want to fight their fellow Muslims. They'd rather end it right here. I'm just curious at what sort of deal Ali and Muawiyah are able to work out. I mean, it depends on what they both want. Is Muawiyah insistent that he be made the caliph, or will he be satisfied with maintaining his power base? I'm not sure.
His hands tied, Ali accepted Muawiyah's truce and call for arbitration, bringing an end to the battle. While he had been on the verge of winning the war, Caliph Ali now stood on the brink of losing everything in the peace to follow.
Yeah.
Each side nominated an arbitrator, Amr ibn al-As for Muawiyah, and strangely deposed Kufan governor Abu Musa al-Ashari for Ali, who despite his personal enmity with Ali, was a popular choice among Ali's largely Kufan army. The two armies departed the battle.
Once again, Amr ibn al-As, always playing a prominent role, always manages to get himself into these political situations.
With agreements for the two arbitrators to meet over the coming months, to judge the murder of Uthman and rightful caliph fairly, with the Quran as their guide. However...
Yeah, you know, I remember I said this when Uthman was executed, although it doesn't seem like Ali necessarily had anything to do with that. He didn't order it. He took advantage of the situation, he benefited from it, and he made the classic mistake of not punishing the murder of the last guy. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but, you know, it was beneficial to him. Right, but, and we've seen many examples of this through many empires. If you're the caliph or the emperor or the king or whatever, and the last guy gets murdered and you get put into that position, it's really in your interest, whether the murderers of the last emperor are your allies or not, to punish them, to show that this is not acceptable. We do not want a repeat of this, definitely. And it sort of enhances your legitimacy. It shows that, you know, even if you benefited from the situation, you won't stand for this. You know, you'll get some justice for the last ruler. And Ali didn't do that, which I think was a mistake on his end.
However, a portion of Ali's supporters staunchly opposed the arbitration, seeing it as a betrayal of God to put the decision in the hands of fallible humans, rather than allowing God to pick a victor on the battlefield.
Interesting perspective. I would say that, I mean, God has just, I mean, if you believe this way, God has just as much influence over the peace negotiations as he does on the battlefield, right? That's what I would think.
Before Abu Musa departed for the first round of arbitration, two of Ali's followers, Zura ibn al-Burj and Hurkas ibn Zuhayr, confronted Ali, demanding he abandon the negotiations and return to war with Muawiyah.
I will say, to be fair, Ali is and has been under a lot of pressure. It seems he in particular has pressure coming from both sides. So that is definitely a difficult position to be in. And that was exactly the same immediately after he became caliph, on the question of, say, punishing those who assassinated Uthman. He had a lot of pressure coming from either side, so he is in a tricky position.
Ali rebuked them, claiming that he would have preferred to fight on at Siffin, but was now bound to honor the covenant he had reached. Unsatisfied, they took up the slogan, "Authority belongs to God alone," with new adherents converting to their viewpoint over the months to follow.
Wow.
Following the return of Ali's forces to Kufa, these Al-Khawarij, or Kharijites as they would later be called, would prove a major thorn in Ali's side, heckling and criticizing him as he led the prayers from the mosque and declaring both Ali and Muawiyah unfit to rule.
I mean, in such a religious society, using religion as sort of your weapon, that's definitely a good way to get people on your side. The way they're framing it, God should be the one to choose. In Ali, you are going against his will by doing this. That's a smart way to frame it, in this very religious society where people strongly hold on to their faith. That's going to get a lot of people on your side.
As this discontentment grew, the two arbitrators met twice over the year that followed, both times for weeks on end, finally returning a verdict in Muawiyah's favor, ordering Ali deposed as caliph in April of 658. Ali refused to abide by the decision, declaring it a political attack rather than a true religious judgment. But the decision greatly damaged his legitimacy and weakened his position in the ongoing Cold War against Muawiyah. Meanwhile, in Kufa, the Kharijite movement was developing from a mere vocal opposition into a new rebellion, with Abdallah ibn Wahb taking command.
Damn, Ali cannot catch a break. Now his position is weakening from both sides. He is struggling with the negotiations. And it, kind of seems like, he's not having a good time there. He might want to back out because he's not going to get what he wants. But now, those who wanted him to resist aren't on his side either. They're about to take up arms against him. So Ali is really not getting help from either direction here.
Departing Kufa in small groups to avoid detection, Ibn Wahb regrouped his forces by the bridge crossing the Narawan, a great canal drawing water from the Tigris River northeast of Al-Madain. Meanwhile, other bands of Kharijite sympathizers across Iraq, having received secret letters from the leadership in Kufa, departed their homes to join Ibn Wahb's band, with savage fighting breaking out near Basra between loyalists to Ali and a band of 500 departing Kharijites. It seems Ibn Wahb intended to continue marching once his forces had assembled to conquer Al-Madain or carve out an independent power base among the Zagros mountains. However, after compelling his remaining supporters to reaffirm their oaths of loyalty to him, Ali was quick to depart Kufa in pursuit of the Kharijites, arriving at Narawan in July 658. Despite their treachery, Ali attempted to avoid battle, pointing out that he now stood poised to return to war with Muawiyah as they had wished, and
this is what I'm saying, Ali right now has gotten very little support from those who favor peace or those who favor warfare, because he's struggling on both fronts. Now he's trying to convince those who favored him going back to war, but who have now ditched and are rebelling against him. He's trying to say, hey, I'm going to do the thing you want. Please come back. I'm tilting in your direction. I guess we'll see if it works. It might be too late for that.
Requesting they return to his cause. Some did, but a majority of the roughly 2,000 rebels remained stubbornly entrenched, leading to some disagreement within Ali's ranks. Okay,
interesting. Seems like it was semi-effective. He got some of them to desert, but a lot of them are still there and willing to fight. So, Ali is probably not going to completely avoid a battle, but he might have an easier time if he does decide to fight.
His followers felt the Kharijites were a minor problem and should simply be ignored until after Muawiyah's defeat. But after several local villagers were slain by Kharijites, Ali's reaction would be swift, with his much larger army engaging the Kharijites on July 17th.
Yeah, that's fair.
Zealously devoted to their cause, the Kharijites did not falter, but now with less than 2,000 facing 14,000, the outcome could be in little doubt. Ali.
Yeah, I mean, this is, they're marching to their own suicide. I guess shows how strongly they believe in their mission, but they don't have a chance to win this battle.
These horsemen formed up his front line under the command of Abu Ayyub al-Ansari, with archers and footmen lined up between them.
I mean, they could do a sizable amount of damage to Ali's forces, though. If they fight that, determinedly, and they're willing to really stand their ground until they're all gone, they could definitely take a dent out of his forces, or they could possibly even bring the battle to a stalemate. I don't see them winning in any situation, but if they really are willing to fight to their deaths, then they could give Ali a hard time, even though they are greatly outnumbered.
When the Kharijites charged, Ali's horsemen split into two groups down the middle and rushed off to the left and right, allowing the archers to shower the onrushing Kharijites with arrows.
Yeah, I think they would have had a better chance if they'd sort of fought more defensively instead of charging right at Ali's men. That was a big mistake. They were definitely not going to take a dent out of his forces. They didn't even fight until their deaths, they just ran to their suicide.
As the horsemen wheeled about and fell on their flanks. After a short, bloody, and largely one-sided confrontation, the rebel army was broken. Little of the mercy Ali had shown Aisha's rebels after the Battle of the Camel would be forthcoming, and the majority of the Kharijites to take the field would perish.
Yeah, well, I guess Ali's not fucking around anymore. He's in pretty deep. He's in a bad situation, so he is, he's not showing mercy anymore.
The Battle of Narawan was a decisive victory for Ali, but also a hollow one, with the embattled Caliph forced to put his own former followers to the sword as Muawiyah grew ever more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree that he had to deal with the situation. I think it was the right move to go and fight that battle, but at the same time, they're exactly right. All he's doing is executing his former followers. He's growing weaker as Muawiyah and Amr continue to grow stronger. So, it's not really his fault. He's in a difficult situation, but it's not looking great for Ali.
The following 2.5 years of uneasy truce saw Muawiyah take great strides, toppling Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr in Egypt and rewarding Amr ibn al-As's loyalty by returning him to power as promised, while also
just what he wanted.
Securing new alliances across the Caliphate, many now seeing him as the legitimate Caliph. By the beginning of 661, after receiving the counsel of his remaining supporters, Ali decided to embark on a second invasion of Syria while he still had the strength to challenge Muawiyah, embarking his forces in preparation for another campaign.
Okay.
The planned offensive would never take place, however. Meeting in Mecca, 3 Kharijite conspirators made a pact.
Wow, they're still at it, huh?
To assassinate the 3 men they viewed as responsible for the civil war, Ali, Muawiyah, and Amr.
Okay, I'm very curious to see how many, if any, of these assassinations succeed, because they could change the course of this conflict decisively.
2 of the 3 assassination attempts failed, but on January 28th...
Once again, Ali has gotten unlucky. I kind of feel bad for him at this point.
As Ali sat praying in the great mosque of Kufa, the 3rd assassin, Abd al-Rahman ibn Muljam, struck him from behind with a poisoned sword.
Wow, murdered in a mosque while praying. Yikes.
Mortally wounding the Caliph and avenging his comrades fallen at Narawan. With Ali dead, few remained who could deny Muawiyah the Caliphate.
Yeah.
Ali's eldest son,
Ali, he just didn't handle things too tactfully, and he kept running into problems. Frankly, a lot of those problems weren't even his fault, but he just got put into a really bad situation. And so he continued to grow weaker as Muawiyah grew stronger. And now, he was unfortunately assassinated in one last stroke of bad luck.
Al-Hassan was pressured into surrendering his claim to the throne, and Muawiyah took power nearly unopposed. Beyond the simple change in leadership, the first fitna, as the civil war came to be known, would have a massive impact on Islam's history. It split a religious and cultural movement that, united, had conquered mighty empires.
Wow.
Even today, the divisions between the major sects of Islam can still be traced to the first fitna and
Wow. Yeah, I mean, those divisions they have been extremely consequential throughout Muslim history to this day. They remain extremely consequential. It's sort of crazy to see where those splits emerged, considering they've continued, and they've been super important in world history.
and the death of Ali. Ali's closest supporters denied the legitimacy of Muawiyah and his successors, elevating Ali and his family line to the role of divinely inspired imams. Known as the Party of Ali or Shi'at Ali, their movement remains strong today as Shia Islam,
Wow.
now divided into sects of its own. The majority of Muslims
It's sort of interesting that, I mean, this has become a deeply rooted religious division, but from what we saw of these events, this was more of a political division, you know? The Muawiyah versus Ali situation, it wasn't necessarily religious, it was more political. Although I guess the two are sort of the same thing at this time period. But over time, this has evolved into a deep religious split.
accepting Muawiyah's ascension are known as Sunni, hearkening to the Sunnah, the traditions and examples derived from the Prophet. Spreading and taking hold in North Africa, the Kharijites remained a maligned, antagonistic force, often in conflict with their fellow Muslims and what they saw as corrupt, illegitimate caliphs. Though their sect remained small, it would be at the heart of numerous uprisings and rebellions during the Umayyad period, and in the following centuries as well. It was from within their ranks, though, that the more moderate and neutralist Abadi community would arise, a faith now dominant in Oman.
Wow.
The nature of leadership in the Caliphate would be forever changed as well, with the elections that had chosen the first 4 caliphs giving way to dynastic succession.
Okay, so that's done with. We talked about at the beginning of this video some of the differences between sort of an election or a council-based selection of your leader versus a dynastic system. Dynastic systems can provide more stability, potentially, though oftentimes they don't in practice. An election, by what I mean by that is selection by a small group of lords or companions or whatever, can sometimes provide a more talented ruler, though oftentimes in practice it doesn't. But now it's a dynastic system. How about that?
Power would remain within the Umayyad clan for the following 90 years, marking the end of the Rashidun Caliphate. Our series on early Islamic history will continue, so make sure you are subscribed and have
All right.
pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider.
And it has continued. And I will continue reacting to it because I enjoy this series. It's very interesting. Getting a serious education in history that I know little to nothing about. And you guys are along for the ride, which I very much appreciate. If you guys enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it. Repeating the word appreciate, but I would appreciate it if you would leave a like on the video, subscribe to my channel, and check out my Patreon, which is linked down below. I hope you guys are all having a good day today, and I will see you all again next time. Goodbye.